The first thing the priest noticed was the writing. It was not large. It was not dramatic. It was a sentence pressed into lime-washed stone, shallow and uneven, as if carved with a trembling hand or the edge of a broken tool. The letters were faint, almost swallowed by the whitewash, but once seen, they refused to disappear. No one could say when it had been written. The farm was already silent by the time anyone looked closely enough to notice. According to regional police notes from April 1922, the cellar wall of the Hinterkaifeck farmstead bore a single line of text, partially obscured, partially scratched away. The report did not translate it fully. It only noted that the message was disturbing in nature and that it appeared older than the murders discovered above. Years later, a priest would stand in that same cellar and feel something press against his chest, as if the air itself had weight. Hinterkaifeck sat alone, several kilometers from the nearest Bavarian village. Even by rural standards, it was isolated. A cluster of buildings surrounded by fields and forest, cut off by dirt roads that turned to mud in the rain and ice in the winter. In 1922, there was no electricity on the property. No telephone. No neighbors close enough to hear a scream. What happened there became known as a massacre. What was never officially recorded was what began weeks before the killings, and what continued long after the bodies were buried. Church correspondence from the Diocese of Augsburg, archived but never released publicly, mentions the farm for the first time in March of that year. The note is brief. It describes a request for spiritual consultation regarding disturbances at a remote property. No names are given. No follow-up is logged. At the time, such requests were common. Priests were often asked to bless homes, barns, even entire fields. Farmers blamed illness, crop failure, or unrest on unseen forces. Most of the time, a prayer and a sprinkling of holy water satisfied everyone involved. Hinterkaifeck did not. The earliest disturbances were small. Footsteps in the attic that did not match any member of the household. Sounds of movement above the hayloft during the night. According to later testimony from villagers, the owner, Andreas Gruber, mentioned these noises weeks before the murders. He claimed to have searched the attic with a lantern and found nothing. No footprints. No signs of entry. Still, the sounds continued. Then objects began to move. Keys went missing and were found days later in places no one had checked. Tools disappeared from the shed and reappeared in the cellar. A newspaper arrived at the house without anyone in the village remembering delivering it. According to a statement recorded by a neighbor after the murders, Andreas believed someone was living on the farm without their knowledge. He suspected a vagrant, or perhaps an enemy. He did not believe in spirits. But he also did not explain why he began locking his bedroom door at night. The psychological atmosphere inside the farmhouse changed. Family members complained of feeling watched. Sleep became difficult. Animals grew restless, refusing to enter certain areas of the barn. The cows had to be forced inside at dusk. These details did not make the police reports. They were preserved in memory. On March 31, 1922, a new maid arrived at Hinterkaifeck. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She had been hired that same day. She had no prior knowledge of the family or the property. She arrived in the afternoon and was never seen alive again. When her body was discovered days later, along with the rest of the household, authorities assumed she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. What they did not know was that she had already seen the writing. According to a letter found decades later among her personal effects, Maria had written to her sister on the morning of her arrival. The letter was never sent. It was discovered folded in her bag. In it, she described the house as heavy. She wrote that the cellar frightened her, though she could not explain why. She mentioned markings on the wall that made her feel unwelcome, as if she were being warned away. The letter ends abruptly. When police finally entered the cellar after discovering the murders, they were focused on evidence. They did not treat the space as a place where something had been happening long before violence erupted. Blood was not the most unsettling thing down there. The wall faced away from the stairs, partially hidden behind shelving. The writing would have been easy to miss. It was not fresh. The grooves were filled with dust and whitewash, suggesting it had been there for some time. The officer who logged it wrote that it appeared to be in a childlike hand, but with unusual pressure, as if whoever carved it had been afraid to stop. The message itself was not included verbatim in the official report. Years later, when the farm was demolished, a local priest requested permission to examine the cellar before it was destroyed. His name was Father Matthias Kohler. He was not an exorcist. He had never performed a formal rite. He had simply heard too many stories. According to his private journal, Father Kohler entered the cellar alone. He described an immediate sense of compression, like being underwater. He wrote that prayer felt difficult, as if words were being swallowed before they could leave his mouth. He noted the smell, not of decay, but of cold earth and metal. Then he saw the wall. He traced the letters with his fingers. He wrote that they were colder than the surrounding stone. The message, as he recorded it, was fragmented. Parts had been scraped away. Some letters were unreadable. What remained suggested a warning, not a threat. A warning. It spoke of something already present, something that had been watching, something that did not arrive with the murders, but had been there long before anyone noticed. Father Kohler attempted a blessing. He wrote that the words of the prayer felt incorrect in his mouth, as if he were speaking a language he no longer understood. Halfway through, he became dizzy. He had to sit on the cellar steps to steady himself. That night, he dreamed of the farm. That night, he dreamed of the farm. In the dream, the house was empty, but the attic was full of movement. Shadows pressed against the rafters. The cellar wall was clean, untouched, as if the message had never been written. When he woke, his hands were scratched. Father Kohler did not submit his findings to the church. Instead, he sealed his journal and stored it in the parish archives. The farm was demolished shortly after. The stones were reused in other buildings. The cellar wall was broken apart. The message should have disappeared. It did not. And the years that followed, residents of nearby villages reported disturbances eerily similar to those described at Hinterkaifeck. Footsteps in attics. Objects moving. Writing appearing on walls, faint and uneven, as if pressed from the inside. Church records show an increase in requests for blessings in the region throughout the 1920s. None mention possession. None mention exorcism. But one file, marked private, contains a transcript of an interview conducted in 1925 between a diocesan investigator and a young seminarian who had been sent to observe a troubled household built from stone salvaged from the Hinterkaifeck ruins. The seminarian described a child in the home who refused to enter the cellar. The child claimed the wall was watching him. When pressed, the child said there were words there, but that they changed when no one was looking. The investigator dismissed the account as imagination. The file was closed. Nearly a century later, the story of Hinterkaifeck is told as a mystery of murder, an unsolved crime, a tale of rural isolation and brutality. What is rarely mentioned is that the message on the wall was never explained. Who wrote it? When it was written? Why it was hidden? And why, according to those who saw it, it felt less like a confession and more like an instruction left too late. In the winter of 1922, before the murders were discovered, a neighbor claimed to have seen a light in the cellar window late at night. He assumed someone was awake, perhaps tending to animals. There should not have been a light there. The cellar had no lamp. No candles were stored inside. According to the same neighbor, the light did not flicker. It remained steady, pressed against the glass, as if illuminating the wall itself. By the time anyone thought to investigate, the farm was already silent. And whatever had been warned against had already finished what it started. In the weeks after the discovery, investigators returned to Hinterkaifeck repeatedly. Officially, they were searching for a killer. Unofficially, many of them were avoiding the place unless absolutely necessary. According to surviving police diaries, several officers complained of headaches and nausea after spending time inside the house. One wrote that the air felt wrong, stale even when windows were opened. Another noted that the animals in nearby fields refused to approach the property, pulling against their handlers when led too close. These remarks were dismissed as nerves. The cellar, however, became a point of quiet contention. Evidence had been removed. Measurements taken. photographs captured. And yet, multiple officers independently recorded the same unease when standing near the far wall. None of them used the word fear. They wrote of pressure, dizziness, and a sensation of being observed from behind, even when the space was empty. One officer scratched out his own notes and rewrote them more carefully, as if afraid of committing something improper to paper. He did not describe the writing. He only wrote that he wished it had been destroyed sooner. When the farm was finally cleared for demolition, a representative from the church was present. This was not unusual. Rural properties were often blessed before being torn down, especially after violent deaths. What was unusual was the instruction he carried. According to diocesan correspondence dated July 1922, the representative was ordered not to perform a blessing inside the cellar. Instead, he was told to remain outside and recite prayers from a distance. No explanation was given. The representative complied. Witnesses later reported that during the demolition, one section of the cellar wall resisted longer than expected. Tools dulled. Stone fractured unpredictably. When it finally gave way, the sound was described as hollow, echoing in a way that did not match the size of the space. Among the rubble, fragments of whitewashed stone were collected and sold cheaply. Farmers reused them. Builders incorporated them into foundations, sheds, and basements. The message was scattered. In the autumn of 1923, a parish priest from a nearby village submitted a report concerning a family experiencing disturbances after renovating their home. The report is clinical in tone. It mentions unexplained noises, feelings of dread, and a child who had begun sleepwalking. The priest performed a blessing. The disturbances lessened, but did not cease. In a margin note, he added a detail that was never addressed. The cellar wall of the home contained older stone, salvaged from a demolished property. The stone bore faint markings that had been plastered over. The markings were scratched, not painted. Scratched. BY 1924, the diocese began quietly tracking similar incidents. They did not label them as possessions. They referred to them as localized spiritual disturbances. This allowed them to document patterns without alarming the public. The pattern was consistent. Basements, cellars, older stone, and writing. Always writing. The words varied, but the style did not. Shallow grooves, uneven lines, letters pressed into the surface with urgency rather than skill, as if the act of writing mattered more than what was written. In several cases, the writing appeared beneath layers of plaster or whitewash, discovered only after walls cracked or were repaired. In one instance, a builder claimed the letters seemed to emerge gradually over several weeks, becoming more visible each time the wall was repainted. Church officials instructed priests to remove the markings when found. Some did, some refused. One priest, Father Alois Ryder, documented his refusal in a letter that was never sent. He wrote that the writing did not feel like a message left by a person. He described it as residue, like an impression left behind after something had passed through. He attempted to scrape it away. According to his letter, the stone beneath was softer than expected. His tool slipped. He cut his hand. He wrote that the blood darkened the letters. After that, he sealed the cellar and advised the family not to enter it. The disturbances ceased. Father Ryder requested guidance from the diocese regarding a formal rite of cleansing. He did not ask for an exorcism. He asked whether a place itself could be afflicted. The response, preserved in diocesan files, was brief. It stated that locations do not suffer possession. Only people do. Father Ryder retired shortly afterward. By the late 1920s, interest in the Hinterkaifeck murders had faded. New crimes, new fears, and political unrest drew attention elsewhere. The farm became a footnote, a grim curiosity. The message on the walls survived only in fragments. Police notes, private journals, half-remembered descriptions passed quietly among clergy. Until 1931. That year, a young priest named Johann Weiss was assigned to assist in a rural parish not far from the former site of Hinterkaifeck. He was newly ordained, eager, and deeply interested in cases of spiritual disturbance. He believed faith should confront darkness directly. According to his later testimony, he began hearing rumors almost immediately. Children afraid of their cellars. Animals refusing to enter barns. Elderly parishioners who claimed the walls whispered at night. Weiss dismissed most of it as superstition. Then he was invited to bless a farmhouse. The owner reported persistent unease in the basement, along with markings that reappeared after being painted over. Weiss descended alone, carrying a lantern and holy water. What he found unsettled him. The writing on the wall was incomplete, as if interrupted. Some letters were missing. Others overlapped. But the style was unmistakable. He recognized it from his studies. Hinterkaifeck. Weiss performed prayers. He reported that the lantern flame bent sideways, though there was no draft. He felt a tightening in his chest, a pressure that made breathing difficult. He completed the blessing and left quickly. That night, Weiss wrote in his journal that he believed the disturbances were not random. He theorized that something had attached itself to the stone itself, not as a conscious entity, but as an imprint, a lingering influence bound to place and material. He requested permission to perform a minor rite of exorcism focused not on a person, but on the location. The request was denied. 2 months later, Weiss returned to the farmhouse after the owner's son fell ill with violent night terrors. According to witnesses, the child spoke in fragmented phrases during these episodes, repeating words that did not form sentences. Weiss recognized some of them. They matched portions of the writing on the wall. Against instructions, Weiss attempted a rite in the cellar. He did not complete it. What happened during that attempt is not fully recorded. Weiss's journal ends abruptly. The last entry describes a feeling of intrusion, as if something was pressing outward from the stone, testing him. He wrote that the words on the wall seemed clearer in the lantern light. Not newer. Clearer. Weiss was found the next morning in the church, kneeling at the altar. He was alive, but unresponsive. He did not speak for several days. When he did, he asked for the cellar wall to be sealed permanently. He was transferred shortly afterward and never served in a rural parish again. Church officials closed the file. They categorized the events as psychological stress compounded by local superstition. No further action was taken. Decades passed. War reshaped the region. Buildings were destroyed and rebuilt. Stone was reused again and again. The physical remnants of Hinterkaifeck spread farther than anyone realized. In the 1970s, interest in the murders resurfaced among historians. New investigations were conducted. Old files reopened. The crime was re-examined. The message on the wall appeared briefly in an academic article, described vaguely as graffiti of uncertain origin. No photograph was included. Around the same time, a priest specializing in pastoral care began collecting accounts of unusual disturbances tied to specific locations. He noticed a pattern in southern Germany. Many of the sites shared a common origin of building materials traced back to early 20th century demolitions. One origin appeared repeatedly. Hinterkaifeck. The priest, Father Lucas Brenner, was cautious. He did not believe in curses. He believed in trauma, memory, and the ways violence could stain a place. Still, he could not ignore the consistency of the reports. Basements. Walls. Writing. Brenner visited one such location in 1978. A family had uncovered faint letters beneath peeling paint. The letters did not form a complete sentence, but they carried the same uneven pressure described in older accounts. Brenner felt the now familiar compression upon entering the space. He did not perform an exorcism. Instead, he prayed quietly and instructed the family to remove the stones entirely. When the stones were taken out, the disturbances ceased. The stones were discarded, or so it was believed. In 1995, during renovations on a municipal building, workers uncovered older foundation stones bearing shallow scratches. One worker reported feeling dizzy while working near them. Another complained of recurring nightmares after handling the stones. The markings were documented and photographed. They matched descriptions from Hinterkaifeck. The stones were removed. The photographs remain. They are stored in a private archive, accessible only to a handful of researchers and clergy. Those who have seen them describe the same sensation. That the writing is not meant to be read, that it is meant to be noticed. In 2018, a restoration project near the original site of the farm uncovered a buried section of wall. It had been used as landfill decades earlier, forgotten beneath soil and debris. Archaeologists documented it carefully. The whitewash had flaked away. The message was more complete than anyone expected. Officials sealed the site before the full text could be published. Access was restricted. The public report cited preservation concerns. A priest was brought in quietly. According to a witness present during the inspection, the priest stood in silence for several minutes after seeing the wall. He did not touch it. He did not pray aloud. When asked what should be done, he reportedly said only that the warning had come too late the first time. The wall was reburied. The location was marked as undisturbed ground. And yet, in nearby homes, small disturbances continued to be reported. A sound in the attic. A sense of pressure in the cellar. Faint lines appearing beneath fresh paint. Not forming a message. Not yet. Just enough to be noticed. Just enough to remind anyone who sees them that something was once written there for a reason. And that warnings ignored do not always disappear. Sometimes they wait.